Good. We're giving everyone a couple of minutes to turn up. There may be a few more latecomers, but let's make a start. So, welcome everybody. It's really good to have you all here for this webinar. I'm James Butler. I work at CMS. I lead the Pioneer Mission Training at CMS. And yeah, delighted to be gathering with you all this evening to think about this really important theme around the future being multicultural. Um, I just want to give you a few things to tell you. Firstly, that as I said, we're recording this. So if could you please keep on mute while we have the webinar so that we don't get background noise that disturbs us and the recording. There will be a chance later on in the evening to ask questions, and we will invite people if you want to come off mute to ask your question at that point. You'll also be able to put questions in the chat if you prefer to do it that way. CMS has been around over 200 years and doing work in connecting with those at the edges and margins. And in fact, that's been a key theme for us in recent years about going to the edges, meeting with Christ at those edges. And it's great to be thinking about some of those themes coming up today in thinking about the future is multicultural. This feels like a very timely topic to be looking at. If the future is multicultural, what's the problem? Well, perhaps we can look around us and see some of those issues, those questions that are coming up, questions for our churches, questions for our communities, questions for our countries that we live in. And so really looking forward to Harvey getting into this theme and stirring our imaginations and helping us to think more deeply about this today. Harvey and I are colleagues and we teach on the Pioneer Mission Training here at CMS. This training is designed for anybody who feels that they have a sense of calling to go into the world, connect with people there and find Jesus working at those edges. We offer a variety of qualifications through Durham University and we would love to connect with you about that if you want to. So let me introduce Harvey before he kicks off. Harvey is the lead of our African Christianity program here in the Pioneer Mission Training team. And he also leads the Acts 11 Centre looking at mission and migration. I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that from Harvey as the evening goes on. Harvey's a Malawian missiologist and theologian who has lived and worked and studied in Europe and North America as well as in Malawi. And he's founded all sorts of things and written a number of books, which you may be familiar with. His most recent book is called Decolonizing Mission and has been an important contribution to a conversation about mission and the future of mission. So today's topic is the future is multicultural. So what's the problem? Harvey, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you so much, James. Really appreciate being with you all here tonight. I see friends from the US, I see friends from Malawi, I see friends from around the world. I'm really deeply grateful that we can spend these few minutes together. Rosie, I see you. Jamaica was great. Thanks for the connections. We'll be talking to you for a bit about the multicultural future of both the church and the communities around us. I come into this subject really by accident. My research in my educational years was focused on evangelizing Westerners. I'd come from Malawi, found myself in Switzerland, worked in Germany, worked in the UK, found myself in the US, and really just finding myself often wondering, how do people actually make it to evangelize Westerners? And really, I think that's a question that's still on my mind. I still haven't figured that one out. but in thinking about that, I began to realize that actually we can't really talk about evangelizing Westerners without noticing the fact that actually there are many, many, many Christians from around the world that have found their ways to the West. And by West, generally, I'm talking about Central Europe, Western Europe, UK included, and United States, Canada. And that we see in the US, it's quite visible following the 1965 Immigration Act that allowed people from really other parts of the world, apart from Europe, to migrate to the US. In the UK here, it really begins with the Windrush generation. And you see people from other parts of the world show up here and begin to reshape Western Christianity in a way. Now, having noticed that in Switzerland, seen it in Germany, seen it in Austria, seen it in the UK, seen it in the US, I began to realize that, yes, of course, there's this excitement on the one hand that Christianity is becoming more and more multicultural. But on the other hand, yes, when we dig deeper than just what we see on the surface, there are a lot of tensions and concerns and worries that people have to wrestle with as they begin to live out their new realities. And it's from that that I end up beginning to speak and write and focus on the multicultural future of the church. This would climax, actually, this starts with a small growth booklet that I published in 2019 called Mission in a Multicultural World, Multicultural Mission in how do I say this? Mission Shaped Church in a Multicultural World. I got it right. And when I did that, so it's a small booklet. It's I think it's 9,000 words, and that would then lead to a fuller book that I published in 2020 called Multicultural Kingdom. Now this is now 6 years ago. The diversity that we talked about back then has intensified today. When we look at the statistics, you see that yes, the West, the UK, for example, the West in general, we're becoming more and more multicultural, becoming more and more culturally diverse, and we still have to wrestle with the question: what does this say to our churches? What are the implications of this in our church lives, in our congregational lives? And so that's what really we will be talking about today. I have a colleague, Jane, who is helping me with the slides. So again, I appreciate that. We can move forward to the next slide. So on the one hand, there is just this reality that in my theological language, I argue that there are all these gifts that God has brought us to our cities from around the world. That worship, Christian worship in our cities, whether it's London or Liverpool, or again Minneapolis, where I spent a few years, or Berlin. Take a snapshot of the church in those cities. It will, to a great extent, reflect the realities of the global body of Christ today. The global body of Christ that has quite a significant number of Africans and quite a significant number of Asians and Latin Americans. The Christian faith is accessible. There are Christians in almost every country around the world. And so that we celebrate, that we see in organizations, especially ecumenic organizations that try to bring Christians to work together. There is a great emphasis on the fact that, yes, when we gather together, there will be different cultures represented. There will be different ethnicities represented. There will be different languages represented. more like what we see in Revelation 7, right? Every nation, tribe, and tongue. We begin to see reflections of that. But while we celebrate that, while this good news that God has brought us together in ways that help us worship better, there is also a tension on the other side. There's the friction of how do people get to work together across cultures? Um, how do we handle ourselves when families from other cultures show up in our churches? How do we treat them? How do we welcome them? What if many of them come in and then the cultures of our churches have to change? What if they speak languages that we don't understand? What if all these things? And so we're stuck somewhere in between the celebration of the multicultural church on the one hand, and the anxieties and the fears that come with the fact that actually the people that are joining us and the people that we're living with or working with speak different languages and look differently, think differently, and bring different kinds of books and do kinds of things that are different from what we do. And it's in this space of, on the one hand, celebrating, on the other, negotiating the fears that I want us to do tonight. It's intentional that I entitled this talk tonight, "The Future is Multicultural. What's the problem?" Because I really think that there should be no problem. The future is multicultural. We take it for granted. We know that this is where we're going. I've been looking at the statistics from the UK, following back 40 years ago, when the UK government started collecting ethnicities in national census. And you realize that at the moment, at the 2021 census here in the UK, put what the global majority heritage, people of other countries, put them at around 25%. And we know from social studies, especially from people like Malcolm Gladwell, that once you hit 25-30%, you reach a tipping point where diversity begins to drive itself. It becomes unstoppable. And maybe I do think that we are reaching that place now. And so this conversation is quite critical. I don't think that we'll be able to reverse. I know there's anxiety around the country, or too much demographic change and too many people coming from other parts of the world and but that boat has sailed. We cannot reverse this. I think what we would need to do is to embrace this and make sure that actually we reflect an awareness and attention to this in our work moving forward. Let's go. Quick one on this. So 2-3 things to mention quickly. Migration has always played a key role in the spread of Christianity. Always. As in, our mission agencies are only a small part of that story. And of course, mission agencies have been around 200 something years. CMS 227 years, and many of them are around that age. Christian migrants have been moving up and down the world for the past 2,000 years. Whether we start with the story in the Gospels or in the book of Acts, and follow that story, we can follow it until today and realize that actually a great part of the spread of Christianity around the world has been simply because of Christian migration. For the past 500 years, it was largely the Europeans taking the Christian faith with them as they migrated to other parts of the world, the British Empire, covering almost 25% of the world's population at some point in time. And British Christians had to move and make the empire work in those places. I was so shocked when I discovered that in the 1800s alone, the 19th century alone, 22 million people left Britain to go and live in the colonies. That's higher than the population of Malawi at the moment. And they moved with their Bibles and they moved with their faith. And when they got, whether it was Malawi or Zimbabwe or Kenya, or wherever they went, they would have a church for their people. And that church will be a point of witness in their communities. And today, Christianity has exploded in Africa, in parts of Latin America, parts of Asia. And when you see, you realize that actually my current migration trends are moving a lot of Africans, a lot of Asians, a lot of Latin Americans to other parts of the world. Some of them will get to the West, but many will be scattered to different countries around the world. We know from the Pew Research of 2024 that at least 47% of all international migrants are Christians. Christians form around 30% of the world's population, but we form a significant majority of migrants around the world. And when we tie into this story, we realize that, yes, of course, this is how mission is happening today. And as a result, for those who find their ways to the West, before long, we see African Christianity emerging in the UK as a very significant factor on the British Christian scene. We begin to see Asian churches. For a long time, it was the African churches were the fastest growing churches in the UK. At the moment, it's the Chinese because of the Hong Kongers. But really significantly, if there has been any significant church growth, it's been due to migration. This is what shapes the multicultural future of the church. Let's move forward. And while we're doing that, we reflect on not just the UK. France is sharing the same stories. Germany, same stories. Norway, Sweden, you see a growing presence of migrant churches. It's become a phenomenon that's actually shaping a great deal of European Christianity. I know that in London, according to Peter Brady, on any given Sunday, at least 65% of church attendance is Black. And Black people form only 14% of London's population. London population then, of course, is beginning to look more Black, but also is shaped by phenomenon happening in Africa, a revival going on in Accra, or some prophet emerges in Nigeria, or some Christian musician emerges in Nairobi. Before long, you begin to see their impact on London. You see their impact in Birmingham, in Liverpool, in Manchester. We are living in a world where this multicultural nature of the church will only continue to increase. Now, I do think that Christianity is inherently multicultural. That it's the monocultural churches that are outside the norm. And I say this because when we see what's going on in the book of Acts, even the word Christian itself emerges in a multicultural context, not just a multicultural context of the city of Antioch. Yes, of course, Antioch was multicultural, but it's because the first group of disciples in Antioch included disciples, Christians from different parts of the empire, maybe different parts of the world. And it's because they were doing something unique, because as different people from different cultures and different ethnicities, different parts of the empire, for the first time, really, they are worshiping one Messiah. They are worshiping one Lord, over against what everybody else used to do. The Egyptians would worship their Egyptian gods. The Indians would worship their Indian gods. The Greeks worship their Greek gods. It's just this group of Christians, so to speak, this group of followers of the way that actually, in spite of their ethnicities and different cultures, they worship this one Jewish Messiah. What shall we call them? We call them Christians. That this whole thing really is birthed in a context of multiculturalism. When we move away from that, we begin to create something that's different from what it was when it started. We could talk about the wider story of the book of Acts, but maybe just to add one point, Pentecost. Pentecost is a story of diversity, as in, on the one hand, as Luke says, people have come from around the empire and beyond to celebrate Pentecost. But when the Spirit hits, when the Spirit is poured out on them, people begin to speak in languages from different parts of the world. Diversity right at the birth of the church. So I think those are some of the things I need to think about. Let's move forward. Now, when we get together in our Christian communities, there are things that are easily visible, that are easily noticeable. I was in a conference last week in Manchester up here, and one of the very first things that was so clear to me was that I did say it from the podium, and it caused me trouble, but I did say this is one of the whitest places that I've been in a long time, in a city like Manchester. This does not make sense. There are Christians in this city from different parts of the world. They bring gifts, they bring things that you would benefit from. It doesn't really do you good to remain monocultural. But there are those things that are very visible. You go into a place, you see who are the visible people. You see what songs they are playing. You see the clear indicators that I'm in a monocultural space. But then beneath that, you begin to notice that it's not just the fact that there are people of different cultures here, or there are no people of different cultures here. Beneath that is a question of power dynamics. Who gets to say what happens here? Our fear of loss. I see this quite a lot, both in white British churches and in African churches. African churches will say, we get some white people visit us for a few Sundays and then they disappear. White British churches will also tell the same story. We get some Africans visit us for a few Sundays and then they disappear. And really, beneath that disappearance are the questions of the power dynamics, or the fear of loss, or the fear of change. These people are going to change us. Shall we let them change us? Identity crisis, control, our historical moment. These are things that lie just beneath the surface, that when you begin to pay attention, you begin to say, actually, yes, there are things going in here that we need to attend to. Let's move forward. In any setting, in any congregation, on the one hand, let me just put it out there. Every culture, every congregation has a culture. We may not see it like that. We may not feel it like that. But there are ways that you can actually say to people, "This is the way we do things here." And those ways have come out of realities that have really taken place around the congregation that make people do things a certain way. Now, again, I see this quite a lot around the UK, even among African churches, that as an African, I can go into an African church and realize that actually I'm a foreigner here, I'm a stranger here, because the culture here doesn't really reflect a culture that I can identify with. And that, again, is common. And the core here is to think about how we shape the cultures of the places that we lead, the places that we worship. We're shaping cultures that are inviting, that are open enough for people to come in and belong, malleable enough, changeable enough so that people who come to visit us can begin to identify. When you are within your culture, sometimes it's just like a fish in water. You don't realize that you're in water up until possibly, and I think this is one of the things that multicultural churches bring us. Up until somebody comes in and begins to ask the questions like, why do you do things this way? And why do you sing that song that way? Why do you do this? It allows us to sort of get out of our culture and begin to see it as a culture itself, and really begin to ask questions: what would it look like if we did some of these things different? So the question is, whose culture in our churches? Whose culture defines what's normal? Whose culture is foreign in our context? Let's move forward. Now, we living in a world at the moment where it does feel like European Christianity, maybe Western Christianity, is somewhat fragile to a point where it feels like strangers, even Christians, will affect it negatively. And so, what do we do when we feel like that? We build wars. So wars that prevent fellow Christians from other parts of the world really worshiping with us, really getting to know us, really getting to work with us. But even more, we build wars to prevent a religious other, whether it's Muslims or Sikhs or people of other faiths, just to make sure that they don't get to shape, change our Christianity, or in other words, I hear, especially from North America, they get to displace us. How does this happen? How did this happen? My argument is that actually we cannot really thrive in our faith if we are worried about what's happening in other faiths. Let's focus on Jesus. Let's focus on what Jesus has done for us, and let's focus on what Jesus has taught us. Taught us to be hospitable. Taught us to be friends with the world. Taught us to care and love our neighbors, and that will deal with a lot of these issues. Let's move forward, Jane. I'm beginning to get anxious about time. So if we do this, and maybe I'll leave this to be the last slide. If we do this, if we begin to realize that migration is a part of the story that we have embarked on as we begin to follow Jesus, that God has always been involved in moving people around, up and down, and God has been always involved in remixing people, and that to some extent, as I argue in multicultural kingdom, that actually for us to continue to thrive as Christian communities in our cities, we need diversity. That we can't really thrive as if we stay afraid of diversity, so to speak. I argue in the book that homogeneity is slow decline. Actually, in the book, I use the word death, but homogeneity is slow death. And I take that from the world of biological sciences. You know that you need to keep mixing the gene pool for the species to continue. If you don't mix the gene pool, you begin to get inbreeding, and it comes with its own problems. if we are going to do well in our Christian settings, diversity becomes critical. And diversity comes a great deal through migration. So, current political language frames migration as a problem. We talk about migration crisis. We talk about migration challenge. We talk about migration problems. And that means that it needs to be solved. It needs to be it needs to be, it's a problem. It's a challenge. Let's solve this thing. I understand that. I think there is a fair place for a conversation around that. But really, as Christians, maybe we could see the hand of God in this story, in this narrative, that we begin to look at migration as a way in which God is shaping the church for the future. That migration, and we see this, I see this in real life here in the Northwest in Liverpool, where I am, where I often meet young white British kids who believe that there are no white British Christians. When they hear Christianity, they think of the Nigerians and the Koreans and the Ghanaians and people who have come from other parts of the world. That for them, Christianity is an un-Western religion, so to speak. And for this to really make sense to them, to make sense to us, we begin to see that actually Christians from around the world are invigorating Christianity in some Western cities. That I mean, I do know quite a few cities around here that, again, as I mentioned, London, for whom Christianity really is made up mostly of migrant Christians. That if we take out migrant Christians in some European cities, the church will shrink massively. Just as I said, if we take out the 14% of London's population that is Black, church attendance will decline quite significantly. And so maybe we can shift from looking at migration and diversity and the multicultural future of both our communities and the churches that we live in, from a threat to manage to actually begin to see that this is a gift that God has given us. This is a gift that God has given, not just us, but has given the whole body of Christ here and elsewhere. And that in this gift of access to other expressions of the Christian faith, we begin to hear and learn about God through different eyes, through different cultural lenses. That allows us really to see God better. I grew up in Malawi, and we always talk about how you can only see God through the eyes of another. And I think this becomes really applicable in this context, that in this context of cultural diversity, it becomes easier to see God better through the eyes of another. And this really ties up well in Paul's image of the body of Christ as a theological resource for this conversation. I like to go to Ephesians 4:16, where the Bible says Christ is the body. Christ is the head of the body, and the body is knit together, is glued together, is held together by that which every part of the body supplies. The body needs a mutual exchange between its members. And that can work on a congregational level, it can work on a global level, but there is no part of the body that is self-contained. And so when we get access to Christians from other parts of the world, possibly they are bringing us gifts that God has given them for us, but also God has given us gifts for them, that we approach every stranger with one hand bringing the gifts that God has given us for them, and on the other hand with an open hand so that we can receive God has given them for us. Nobody receives from God everything they need by themselves. God gives us part of what we need, and the remainder gives us to our neighbors and our friends. The body is by design to be a community of mutual exchange. American Christians have things that they can give to the body, but the wider global body. But also the global body has gifts for the American church. Same for the British church. We have gifts here that God has given us for our Brazilian brothers and sisters and our Chinese brothers and sisters. But God has also given them gifts for us. We bring our gifts, but we also bring our open hands so that we can receive. This is where cultural diversity becomes important. We can't just hang out as eyes and just be an eye and we don't need anybody else. We need the different brothers and sisters that God has placed in our cities if we are going to be fully who God has made us to be. But also, on the other hand, we have gifts that God has given us for our brothers and sisters so that they can be fully who God has made them to be. And in the end, it's only through community, it's only through exchange that the body can be the body. Its vitality is grounded on that which every joint supplies. So, the future is multicultural. What's the problem? Let me stop there. Thank you so much. We'll take questions and have a chat.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Harvey. Thank you for sharing that with us, and lots to think about, reflect on. I'll give everybody just a few seconds just to kind of think and reflect, and then ask if you want to write a question in the chat or raise a hand. Use the if you use the emojis at the bottom to raise your hand, that will help. So if you just click the react button at the bottom, and then there's an option to raise a hand, and that will put you in an order as well, so I won't have to keep track of everyone. I can see a question in the chat, Harvey. Shall I read that out and then you can? So to what extent, so this is from Sarah, to what extent do you think the tensions, fears are coming from a scarcity mindset, i.e. diversity means that we will be taken, that what we have will be taken from us, and or the inability to surrender, even to suspend our belief that we, the West, are the leaders, teachers, etc.
Sarah, thank you. I think you just answered your question. I really don't think that generally our churches, our church members are worried about scarcity. And I say this because I know that here in the UK, Christianity is very much middle class. It's people with careers, and when we begin to look at, say, what's happening on the political landscape and the concerns about white, I don't know whether lower class is the right way to use, but white poor men. I think that's a different conversation. When we are talking about what's going in our churches are affluent, and I no, I don't. I think it's the fear of the loss of power, the fear of well, you've used the word surrender, the fear of what does it mean for us to treat people that we once colonized as equals. Let me put it that blunt. Right? I think this is the issue that we wrestle with. How can how can we work with these Africans or Indians or Brazilians as equals in our churches? So it's okay that they can form their own churches out there, as long as they don't force us to relate with them as equals. Um, yeah, and that's a history that goes back several centuries. I think we have come to a place where it must be spoken about. We've come to a place where we must actually, if what's going on, say, in the Christian nationalism conversations doesn't really get addressed in ways that actually talk about that history, we will be just going around in circles. Let's talk about the fact that really what's driving a lot of this in our churches, a lot of the segregation in our churches, is the simple fact that it's difficult for Europeans, and I'm not just talking about British people. I've seen this in Germany. I've seen this in Switzerland. I've seen this in the US. It's difficult for white people to imagine worshiping together with other people from around the world as equals. I'm not saying 100%, but I think it's visible enough that we can begin to see the patterns. Thank you.
Can I ask then, do you think it's shame? Is that rooted in shame or arrogance or some sort of cocktail of both?
For the past 500, 600 years, Europeans have taught themselves that they are on top of the world. And to begin to convince people otherwise. And I mean, of course, economically, militarily, yes. But in the body of Christ, Christ changes all that. Christ flattens the hierarchy. But to take that flattening of the hierarchy from the church to wider community, it's difficult.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Got a question from David.
David.
Yeah, just a comment. Because so frequently, and I work primarily with first, second generation migrant people. So frequently people say about them that they have only come here for what they can get. Which seems to me, yes, it links into what you were saying before about our worldview is that we are at the top, therefore we have the most, therefore other people are jealous and they want a bit of it. I also find it quite ironic on the basis that a lot of English, British migration and colonization of other places was because we went there for what we could get. But people think, have that, or seem to express that mindset that sees migrant people as coming to this country for what they can take from us. And I'm wondering, first of all, if you agree with that, if that's a common understanding, and secondly, how do you think the church can respond to that mindset?
I think you point out something very important. The British migration to the rest of the world that I talked about, that took 22 million Britons out of these islands in the 1800s, was an economic migration, right? Whether they're going to Cape Town or they're going to Nairobi, or whether they're going to India, it was an economic migration. And the funny thing is, you hardly find any British people who will identify as migrants. Right? Migration is a black and brown people problem that we need to solve. I think that there's a sense in which a great deal, not everyone, but a great deal of the migration that comes from the rest of the world to the West is, of course, economic migration, but it's rooted in a sense of if we go there, we have better access to resources that we don't have access to back home, and people do things to get access, to get that kind of access. That means that while we wrestle with that, then we also need to think about the narratives in our churches, the narratives around the people that we work with in our churches. To some extent, even if we go back to the book of Acts, migration, Christian migration especially, but migration in general, the migration that we talk about in Acts 11, the organization that I lead at CMS, is happening because of persecution. That in all these circumstances, many of them will be difficult circumstances. People will leave their homelands thinking, I'm just running away from persecution. But you never know. God's hand is in it somewhere. God wants you to evangelize some people in India or in Kazakhstan. And so he moves you probably slowly from one place to another up until you get where he's going. Can we begin to integrate that into our understanding of mission and into our understanding of what God is doing in the world? And this is really why we started Acts 11 project, because we noticed that yes, Christians are moving up and down the world, but hardly do they think about mission. They think about Christian migration. They think they're migrating and they're doing all these things, but we hardly find in that narrative an awareness of possibly in this day and age of visa restrictions and of black and brown migration around the world. In this day and age, it's the student visas. It's these things that actually play a key role in shaping mission, that play a key role in sharing the good news of Jesus around the world. So maybe to begin to reshape our missiology so we can see Christian migration as part of God's mission in the world today, that we don't just count on people who have been sent by mission agencies to go and work somewhere else, but we can also think of the people who are moving from one part of the world to another for other reasons, but they are Christians, they're carrying their Bibles, and when they get where they're going, they can begin to share the good news with people. Thank you.
Thanks, Harvey. We've got just over 5 minutes really left. There's a number of questions. I wondered whether we could take, well, if Winnie's got her hand up and there's a couple of questions in the chat. Why don't we hear from Winnie, I'll read the questions, and then you can kind of give a few responses in that 5 minutes to those things before we wrap up. Does that sound all right?
Sure.
Winnie, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. So I was trying to think whether this discussion is being framed around, say, areas of like, diversity or high migration. As there's also somebody from Malawi and currently based in London. As you know, like the Malawian church, Malawi in general is not really like a multicultural country. I think this question came to mind because of the statement as well that homogeneity, is death in a sense.
Yeah.
But like if you think of, say, the Malawian context, we do not have a lot of people from different cultures. So the growing church is predominantly, say, Malawian people. Then you factor in things of like language. That does not only apply to Malawi, but say even here in the West, is that like, for instance, you have people from the North and you have people, and so they're more comfortable to, they express themselves better in the language that they understand best. And so because of that, say here in the UK, you have like a Korean church or you have like a Chinese church because of, language, which means now you're sort of moving in again into one sort of cultural group.
Sure.
In that case, would you say that that is also, I guess, contrary to how, biblically the church would have been set up, and would that sort of homogeneity lead to death?
Good question.
Great. Thanks, Winnie. Let me read the other two, and then Harvey, you can kind of do a bit of a scattergun approach on these. So Pim asks about British churches that are broadly liberal. How can British churches which are broadly liberal theologically build genuine mutual partnerships with immigrant Christian communities whose theology and cultural expression are more conservative in ways that honour each tradition while creating a shared sense of belonging and mission? And then there's also a question from Debbie, which asks for some practical experiences or ideas for how churches could begin to engage with this theme. So not much to
All
wrap
right,
up in
okay.
5 minutes,
Okay.
Harvey.
That's right. Yeah. Winnie, I start Multicultural Kingdom, my book, with stories from close to Blantyre in southern Malawi, where people speak Yao, Lomwe, and Shewa, and Sangu at the same time in the same services. So this is Malawi, but this is very multicultural. And we see that even for those churches, and these are churches around my home area, the ability to be open enough to incorporate other cultures and other languages in the service have helped those churches grow and have helped those churches survive for longer. Now, I think we point out a very important question. How can we be multicultural while we are building a monocultural church, for example? How do we continue to be multicultural when we are beginning to shape a congregation that will reflect one culture? I think that's a challenge for all of us. And I do argue that actually I think we need both spaces. We need spaces where the Africans can be African, so they get a sense of what their true African gift is. But that's not all they need. They need spaces where they can belong and bring their African gifts, and also spaces where they can receive gifts from other parts of the body. And so there has to be authenticity, and that authenticity requires that we actually belong in both spaces. This is where I push back on the people who argue that we need intercultural churches and not multicultural churches. I think multicultural allows you to belong in multiple places at the same time. Intercultural churches will end up creating a culture, a congregation that feels like it's just one culture. We need to belong in both places. I need to continue to be Malawian if I'm going to bring the Malawian gift to the table. But I need to do that well aware that what I have is just a portion of what God intends for me. I need to be able to receive from my British brothers. I need to be able to receive from my American brothers. I need to be able to receive from other Christians. We need both spaces. On the question of theological differences, I do think that this is easily the one excuse that people use to get out of trying to build relationships with people from other denominations, other theological traditions. And I say this because I know that there is no theological tradition that will say we have it right and we have it all. Our theologies, especially in the world today, we become better theologically informed by engaging theologies that are different from our own. I challenge my students, you can't do your bachelor's, you can't do your master's just reading European theology. You need to be able to engage theological discourses from other parts of the world, even from people that you don't agree with. That shapes us to be better followers of Christ. When we have access, when we can do this, let's dialogue across the theological divides. And we realize that actually it's the same spirit. It's one Lord, one faith, one baptism. And we discover those things that bring us closer together. And as we begin to see one another, really as seeing one another, this is part of my slides that I didn't get to use. But when we really begin to recognize one another and recognize that the difference is not a threat, that actually difference is a gift, we can shape better congregations for the world that we live in today. Practical experiences and or ideas for helping churches begin to engage with this theme. I have problems with churches that think that they have everything they need and they don't need to engage anybody who is different. And so really find the spaces, find the congregations in your cities that look different from you, right? You don't need to go to Kenya to meet Kenyan Christians. They are right there in your cities, probably next to your churches. Engage them. I mean, don't go for the difficult subjects. Go make friends with them. And as you make friends with them, you see that they do things differently. And some of these things will be helpful to you. And as you engage with them, they also begin to see that you do some things differently. And some of those things will be beneficial to them. And so easy win here is to just look for Christian communities in your cities that are different from yours, and go not with the heart to teach and tell people how to behave, but go in the heart of fellowship. Let's fellowship. The fellowship belongs to the Spirit, and the Spirit is going to guide us as we do that. As we see one another for really who God has made us to be, it's possible that we can really shape and embrace the multicultural future of what God is doing in our world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harvey. That's a great challenge to finish on. So yeah, let's. I don't know if you want to use emojis to show appreciation to Harvey, but thank you so much, Harvey, for helping us to think and reflect on this today. It's been a really good webinar, I think.
Thank you.
If you found this useful, you might want to, and helpful, some of the reflections coming out of it, and want to explore this more deeply, we have plenty of opportunities at CMS in our Pioneer Mission Training to explore this in more depth. And some of these things that Harvey has been talking about are exactly the kind of things we've been trying to live out within our training as we've engaged in that multicultural and intercultural place of learning and building relationships and thinking about what it means to be in mission together. So yeah, if you'd be interested in finding out a little bit more about us, we have some open days coming up. So we have an open day in Oxford on Tuesday, the 30th of June from 10:30 till 1, or you can come online on a Zoom meeting like this in that same evening, Tuesday the 30th from 7 till 8:30. And if that doesn't work, you can, if it work for you, you could come along on Monday, the 20th of July, again on Zoom at 7 p.m. And we'll tell you a little bit more about training. If you can't wait till then and want to find out, you can also drop us an email or get in touch. I think Jane hopefully has put a booking form into the chat if you want to find out more about our open days and sign up for one. But we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to connect with you. Just get in touch and we can go forward. But thanks again for being with us this evening. Thank you again to Harvey. And yeah, we've enjoyed being with you and hope to see you again.